exactly what it looks like if I cut myself in half right now?
No.
No. It's from an embryonic origin. Through the embryonic period of life from 4 weeks to 8 weeks from fertilization. So, what's structure number 1? Hypomere. What is structure number 2? Neural tube. What does the neural tube become? Spinal cord and brain, or in other words, it becomes the central nervous system. What is structure number 3? Epimere. And structure number 4? Sclerotome. What develops from structure number 4? Okay, so skeleton and bone, but very specifically, which part of the skeleton? The vertebral column and the ribs. So from your coccyx and sacrum up to your cervical vertebra and part of your occipital bone, that all comes from the sclerotome. So pretty much your vertebral column and your ribs come from the sclerotome. Questions thus far? Okay. What is the name of structures 1 and 3 combined? The myotome. Myo referring to what? Muscle. And how many layers come from it? Very good, 8. What layers are they? Very good. So epaxial has 2 layers. The epaxial has the superficial layer and the deep layer, just the 2. And then 6 from the hypomere. And what are those 6 layers?
Ventral, subvertebral, lateral. Lateral has 4.
Yeah, they're all written on the board. Ventral, outermost, or supercostal upon the ribs. External, middle, internal, and subvertebral. This was a test, by the way. This was a whole page on a second test, my second test. So you can see it's not too terrible. 7. What branch of the spinal nerve grows into and innervates number 3? So number 3 becomes what muscles?
The epaxial.
The epaxial, those back extensors. And so what branch of a spinal nerve goes in there?
Dorsal ramus.
The dorsal ramus. The dorsal ramus innervates epaxial muscle. The ventral ramus innervates hypaxial
Sorry,
muscle.
I meant to jump.
From what structure are the subcostal muscles derived? I heard it, yes. 1 from hypaxial. But it's right there. So again, because we know that the subcostals are from what layer of the thorax? Does anybody remember? It is the internal. It's very close to that region of the subvertebral, but it's not the subvertebral region. Remember the thorax, and we're going to go through this in a bit. The internal layer is split up into 4 different muscles, one of which is the subcostals. And so all the stuff that's going to be there is coming from the hypomere, structure number 1. So it would come from number 1 to get to the answer of question number 8. Number 9, what is the name of structure number 5?
Neural crest.
Neural crest. And what types of cells are derived from structure number 5? Pseudounipolar neurons. That's why on those nervous traces we always draw their cell bodies in the what structure? The dorsal root ganglion. What name is associated with nerves coursing through structure number 6? Not quite. So you can have parasympathetic stuff going to, not into the gut tube. Splanchnic is the word we're going for. So why do we call things, so first of all, what is structure number 6 called?
The mesentery.
The mesentery. And So it's that connection between the body wall out to the gut tube. So whenever we have nerves heading out to the gut tube, what adjective do we put on it? Splanchnic. So those nerves coursing through structure number 6 would have splanchnic associated with them. Sympathetic splanchnic nerve or parasympathetic splanchnic nerve. And what tissue is structure number 6 made of? Mesothelium, very good. Because it's that coelom that's been, this is the balloon essentially. All this is the coelom. And what do we call the balloon when it's touching the gut tube? The visceral part of the coelom. We already stated this is the mesentery. And what do we call the balloon when it's touching the wall? Parietal. This is in the workbook, but it wasn't brought up in lecture. What's this bump called right here? The urogenital ridge. You didn't teach in lecture, but it's in the workbook, so just in case, that's what this is. And so what do you think arises from this ridge? Urinary system and lots of the reproductive system, your genitals. Questions with the embryology stuff? Okay. So the next assignment is right here. You just have to, this has definitely been a test question as well. You simply have to go through, and for example, we're doing the thorax, so what would be the ventral muscle in the thorax? Sternalis. Rectus, because it's straight. And what's the function of the sternalis in humans? It's kind of falling away because it doesn't have a function. If it did, it kind of starts up here and inserts into the ribs. So when it contracts, what's it going to do to the ribs?
Compress.
Elevate them. Okay. Who remembers what the outermost or supracostal muscle is in the thorax? Very good. There's 2 of them, right? There's the, so why is it called serratus? Because it looks serrated, like a serrated knife, like a saw. And we have one up here, so it's on the back side, so what's the other adjective we put with it? Very good. It's saw-like, it's on the back side, serratus posterior. There's a superior and an inferior. So with the serratus posterior superior, it starts on those spinous processes of my vertebral column, and then it kind of goes down and inserts on a rib lower than the spinous process. So what happens when I contract that muscle? Elevate or depress the ribs? It's going to elevate the ribs, pull up on them. This spinous process is not a mobile piece of my skeleton. However, although it doesn't look like it, where the ribs connect into the thoracic vertebra, there is a small synovial joint that allows for movement of the ribs. It's minimal, but the ribs do move. So it's going to elevate the ribs. Now the serratus posterior inferior also starts on the spinous processes down on the lower thoracic vertebra, and it extends up to insert on the ribs above the spinous process where it originates. So when it contracts, will it elevate or depress my ribs? Depress ribs. With those? Yeah, if it's on, you have a box in your book that has everything. I don't think he'd go that far. I mean, when you're doing lateral rotation, your obliques do a lot. On the tests, that wasn't stressed. It's just this. But if you want to get 110%, then put that. Other questions thus far? Okay, then we get to our external layer, and what do we call it?
External intercostal.
External intercostals. And when these contract, what do they do to the ribs?
Lateral flexion.
Elevate the ribs, bring them together, and elevate them. These were used for lateral flexion in what type of animals? Fishies. I always think of Dory. She's just using her intercostals from Finding Nemo. So external are the ones that are lifting the ribs. And then the middle layer, what do we call them? If we had the external intercostals, we have the internal intercostals. If the externals elevated the ribs, what would you guess the internals do? Depress the ribs. So he always says like X, like in the pockets, the thing they'll always show you in lab, because sometimes it gets confusing on which fibers are which. The thing I always remember is X goes to sex and in goes to chin. Because the fibers of the external intercostals, and those who haven't learned the obliques yet, but you'll learn it in the next lecture, we learned it this morning, and the external obliques. You know, he says hand in pockets, and it all heads towards your sexual organs. So X to sex, and the in goes to your chin. That's how you can remember the fiber orientation. X to sex, in the chin. Works for both the intercostal muscles and your obliques. So I should have given myself a little more room, because the internal layer has how many muscles again? 4. So let's start anterior and head posterior. What's the first one we're going to run into?
Transverse thoracic.
Transversus thoracic. And pretty much all of these are going to be depressors of the ribs. So the transversus thoracis is just deep to my sternum. It originates on the sternum, on the interior side, and attaches to those ribs and pulls them down. Next, as we move sideways, we have a nice sheet of muscle heading up and down, and we call this the
Innermost intercostal.
innermost intercostals. Again, these are all rib depressors. Then, as we get back by the rib, where the ribs begin, there's these muscles that are just down below the ribs. So what do we call them? Subcostals. Costal is another word for rib, because Spanish rib is. Very good. Costal. It's all Latin based. So we have subcostals. And what will their action be?
That's the ribs.
Also, they're going to be depressing the ribs. And then we have this weird one that doesn't look like a body wall muscle, but really is. And what is it?
Diaphragm.
The diaphragm. So if I just quickly draw